Well, we've got another album on our hands where I didn't really know anything about the group before getting introduced to them. Doing a little bit of research and finding out there's a lot in the history of this band and what it all means. And yeah, it's interesting. So let's dive into it. 93696 by Liturgy. So Liturgy is an American black metal band. It's really interesting because to kind of quantify the style of music, because like any good music out there right now, kind of putting one label to it seems a little bit hard pressed to do. I would kind of say that they're more of like a symphonic tech black metal band. So I mean, black metal is pretty good notifier for that, and it's comprising of Helena Hunt Hendricks on vocals and guitars, Mario Myron on guitars, Tina Vincent Clark on bass, and Leo Dukovsky, I believe that's how you pronounce that, on drums. And they actually describe their music, and it is pretty well fitting as transcendental black music and incorporating a lot of the symphonic styles of like classical music into their kind of wheelhouse, getting a lot of like string movements, getting kind of like that more symphonic classical approach to their music, and it's what I really love, and they were even saying that in their early days they wanted to work with bands like Swans, and if you're like me and a huge Swans fan, you definitely hear the presence of that kind of style, that kind of avant-garde metal work in the DNA of this band. Now, this is the first time that I've come to Liturgy, so I didn't have a lot of the history behind it, and, I've done a little bit of research and talked to a couple of my friends about this, and apparently there's some pretty interesting background to Hunt Hendricks, specifically in like creating this manifesto for metal music and black metal music and what it should do, what it should mean. It's interesting. I don't know if it really adds too much to the actual music itself, but it at least provides a really nice kind of context. For me, this kind of stuff kind of reminds me of like after you read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, going back and reading like the Similitude or the Unfinished Tales, or Tales from the Middle Earth kind of aspect. It adds a little bit more extra flavor. It adds a little bit more of an extra spice or garnish. But, I mean, you don't need to read all that stuff, and maybe you shouldn't, to enjoy the music. The music stands on its own, and that's really, what I come to when it comes to this type of music. Because I have gone back and I've listened to the rest of their discography because, spoiler alert, I love this album. I thought it was a really great treat. I'm loving the style that they're putting down. Like, this is the style of black metal that I love the most. It's twisted, it's aggressive, it's balls to the wall insane, but there's moments on here that are divine, that touch kind of this angelic form. And this does kind of come through with, the style of music that they're trying to do here, but it's almost as if the actual divine angels from the biblical texts come down, and it's so abstract, it's so bombasive that you can't really quantify or take in all at once. It's something that you have to decompartmentalize in your brain in order to make sense of it. So I feel like they were really like playing around and, testing the waters with this kind of style with their back catalog, like The Origin of Anomalies back in 2020 and HAQQ back in 2019. Really kind of playing with them, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. And I think this kind of all came around with Aesthetica. Boy, fun times to try to pronounce those kinds of things back in 2011, and really kind of like playing with these kinds of flavors. And I feel as though they've took what they learned from those past albums and really applied it and really mastered it on this album. Coming right from the forefront, one of the things that I particularly love about this record is its structure. There's really 4 sides to this record, creating an actual double album that I really appreciate. And each of these sides are kind of led with an idea, like a focus word, if you will, starting with individuations and hereditary, I believe it is, sovereignty, and Emancipation, and each one kind of flouts around and plays around with these concepts and really kind of digs deep into what they kind of mean. So if you're, really into like philosophy and that kind of thing, and like the meaning of words and the complexities of those, man, it was a lot of fun to really get into and really dive in with a lot of these types of tracks. And this is one of those few moments where the length of the album doesn't actually bother me, because they have something to do with it. They actually have something to say. We have about an hour and 22 minutes of music on this. And, with black metal and experimental black metal in particular, having lengthy albums, it's kind of like their MO. But again, as long as they have something to say, I'm all for an album being longer. It's when they start to take up space, it starts to feel dragged out, it feels like they're not covering any new ground, that I'm like, this album could have been cut down. But because this is so dense, there's a lot going on, it really does pack the punch. Now, I will admit the second half of this album is a little bit stronger than the first half. Like, the first half opens up with a very heavenly, very beautiful, very operatic vocalizations with Daily Bread. Then we get into Degeneration, the first 8-minute track that really bangs you over the head. It really sets the stage. If you aren't familiar with this type of music, it does a really good job of preparing you for the rest of the album. It's bombastic, it's heavy, it's got a lot of blast beats. We have Helena just screaming and yelling and, being a force to be reckoned with. We come into Celia, a little bit of a shorter track to kind of provide a little bit of a respite, a little bit of a breather before we get into, some of the more challenging ones with Helligen 2 and Before I Knew the Truth. And each one, building off of the momentum of the last one, providing these complex layers of sound and noise. There's a lot of moments where you're not even quite sure if it's music that you're listening to. It could just be this insanity driving boof of music. But the thing that I love, and the thing that makes me come back to this album and this style of music, is it always resolves. It always comes together. It always finishes the chord and provides that breather. It's the tightening of the coil and the release. And I feel like with a lot of black metal, they have the tightening of the coils, they have that bombastic and that bombardingness, but they never really resolve it. They never really come together as a whole. And we have on like Angels of Hierarchy and the final track off of the first disc of Red Crown 2, we have that final resolve. We have that final kind of breath of fresh air that was kind of building towards all of this. Now, as I mentioned, the second half of this album, though, for me, is really what I love. I feel as though the first half was really the building. It was really the structure. It's building the concepts up. It's getting us in the mindset and the idea. This is the payoff. This is when they're really starting to play with it. And no more can you see this exemplified within the two big tracks on this album of the title track, 93696. And probably my favorite one of Antigen, it could be Antigon, Antigen 2, both being 14, almost 15 minutes. And these longer stretches of music provide this much bigger kind of stretching of legs, especially on Antigen 2, where we have this massive resolve, this big chorus of like this angelic divine touchness that I cannot help but get behind. It provides what I love. It sets things up so that you're anticipating it. The music that came before sets things up so you're not surprised when it happens. And when it's all resolved, I get this massive sense of euphoria that I cannot help but love. And the tracks that pad this on the second half, the Angel of Emancipation, Ananon, Helligen 2 reprised, Angel of Individuation, and Immortal Life 2, they do a great job, again, structuring the second half of the album, providing the padding that is needed for these massive tracks to exist, while also standing on their own. Some of these tracks are, about a minute or so, just to provide a little bit of a breather, provide a little bit of context for the big track to kind of come about. And I like how in the second half there's a little bit of a call response. Angel of Emancipation and Anon are 2 minutes, almost 3 minutes, and 5 minutes. Then we get the big 14-minute of the title track. Then we have Helligen 2 reprised and Angel of Individuation, again, about a minute and a half and 5 minutes. And then we have Antigen 2 being that 14 minutes. So it's very call and response. It's very mirrored to it. And I love that structure. I love that structure. I love a good structure in that sense. So yeah, this was a great time. I know there's some people out there that have a little bit of a bad taste with liturgy, and I totally get it. It's a lot. And even within kind of, the history of the band, and, some of Hendrix's ideas are a little bit out there, and I can get that. But for me, I always look at, okay, unless, the person is spouting some pretty dangerous rhetoric, how does the music stand on its own? And in this case, the music on its own is fantastic. This was, as I mentioned, my first foray into liturgy, and I loved it so much that I went back and I listened through their entire discography and was blown away. I think, honestly, now it could be being exposed to this one first, but in my mind, this is their best work. And again, that could be just because this was the first that I was exposed to, like the exposure, whatever it is. There's an actual, psychological thing. Like the first thing that you are exposed to tends to be the best because it's, the first thing that makes the mark. So yeah, I love this album. I absolutely love this album. This is a run, don't walk. If you're a fan of black metal, if you're a fan of experimental music, if you're a fan of rock and opposition or avant-garde music, this is one to check out. This is one not to sleep on. So I will say in the end, 93696 by Liturgy is one that I absolutely love with my whole heart. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year, this one is my favorite album of the year. Like, this is top contender for me for album of the year. And it very much, it has the quality, if I sit with it long enough and really digest a lot of the nooks and crannies, to be a full-on masterpiece. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year, I quantify this as a full-on masterpiece and put it into my Masterpiece Theater playlist, because it has a very strong possibility to do so. But I also know with this type of music, after about the first month or two, it might not age as well as others. A lot of that just has to be with me sitting with the album and really getting into the small nooks and crannies, because this album's thick, y'all. This album's dense. So that being said, this is a run, don't walk. It's an absolute one to go and check out. Yeah, it gets the note seal of approval. Absolutely. As I mentioned, contender for album of the year so far. This sets the bar pretty high. So yeah, great job. Thumbs up. Go and check it out. And that's it for me from 93696 by Liturgy. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for today, because that's all I got. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.